The first cries of the newborn broke through the still morning air, echoing through the narrow alley behind the saloon. The world didn't pause to listen. The horses still clopped by. The men still shouted over whiskey, and the wind still pushed dust through the sun-baked streets of Red Mesa town. Inside, a wooden shack behind the saloon, a young woman named Clara May lay weak and trembling, her breath sharp and shallow. Sweat glistened on her forehead as her arms cradled the small, squirming bundle pressed to her chest, her son. The child's tiny hand grasped her torn dress as if he already knew this harsh world might take her away. But before Clara could whisper her first lullaby, a man stepped inside, tall, with a mean face and greed in his eyes. "It's done?" he asked the midwife. She nodded, and without even glancing at Clara, the man threw a few coins on the floor. "Good, clean her up. She'll fetch a better price before sunset." Clara's eyes widened.
"Price? What do you mean?"
she asked, clutching her baby tighter. But the man smirked and said, "You belong to the saloon, sweetheart. You've had your fun. Now it's time to pay your debt." That afternoon, word spread like wildfire through town. A woman and her newborn up for sale at the auction block. The men laughed, the women shook their heads, and the children watched wide-eyed as the platform was built in front of the sheriff's office. When the sun began to sink behind the red hills, Clara was brought out, barefoot, her dress torn, holding her baby close to her heart. She looked fragile, but in her eyes burned the silent fire of a mother who would rather die than let go of her child. The crowd gathered, coins clinking, whispers rising like a storm. "A strong young woman," shouted the auctioneer, "healthy, skilled with chores, and a newborn babe to sweeten the deal." "Who'll start the bidding?" From the shadows near the blacksmith's shop, a man watched. Elias Kane, a rancher known for his solitude. He had once been a soldier, once been a husband, once been a father, until fever took both wife and child in a single winter night. Since then, Elias spoke little and smiled less. But something about the sight before him, that broken woman clutching a new life, stirred something long buried in his chest. The bidding began, and with each shout, Clara's hope withered. She closed her eyes, whispering to her baby, "Don't cry, my love. If I can't save you, may heaven hold you." The auctioneer's voice boomed again. $30 silver. Another voice shouted, "40!" And then, just as the hammer was about to fall, a calm, deep voice cut through the noise. $50 silver. The crowd turned. Elias stepped forward, hat low over his eyes, leather coat brushing the dust. "You heard me," he said quietly. 50. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. "Sold!" he declared, slamming the hammer. Elias climbed the steps, handed over the coins, and faced Clara. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, a man carved from stone and a woman trembling like a leaf in the wind. Then he spoke softly. "You're free now." Clara blinked in disbelief. "Free?" He nodded. "You and the boy. You owe nothing to anyone." Tears filled her eyes, confusion and gratitude twisting inside her chest. "Why would you do that for me?" Elias looked at the baby, then back at her. "Because once I lost everything I loved. Maybe this time I can save something worth keeping." As the crowd dispersed, whispering behind their hands, Elias offered his hand to Clara. She hesitated, then took it. Together they walked away from Red Mesa, the woman, the baby, and the man who had just bought back a piece of his own soul. That night, under the star-filled sky, they camped beside a quiet river. The baby slept soundly wrapped in a small blanket. Elias had carried in his saddlebag one that had once belonged to his own lost child. Clara watched him, her heart aching with a strange mix of sorrow and hope. "Thank you," she whispered across the fire. Elias didn't answer. He simply stared into the flames and said, "We'll reach my ranch by dawn. Rest now, you're safe." And for the first time since giving birth, Clara closed her eyes, not in fear, but in peace. Morning broke golden and wide over the hills of Kane Ranch. For Clara, it felt like another world, quiet, green, and full of life. Elias helped her down from the wagon, his hands rough but gentle. The baby stirred in her arms, cooing softly as if the open air itself was a blessing. The ranch was simple, a wooden house, a barn, and acres of wild grass swaying in the wind. To Clara, it looked like freedom. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Clara found herself healing, her body gaining strength, her spirit slowly remembering what it felt like to smile, She cooked, tended to the garden, and sang to her baby while Elias worked the fields. He never spoke much, but every morning he'd leave a small jug of milk by her door, or a bunch of wildflowers he never admitted picking. She began to see that beneath his quiet shell was a heart that carried its own scars, deep but kind. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the valley as lightning tore the sky. The baby woke crying, and Clara rushed to calm him. Suddenly, the door swung open. Elias entered, soaked and breathless.
The barn's flooding.
He shouted. Without hesitation, Clara handed him the baby.
Go, keep him safe,
she cried and ran into the rain to help the animals. Together they fought the storm side by side until the winds died down and silence returned. When it was over, they stood drenched in the muddy yard, breathing hard. Elias looked at her, eyes shining in the faint moonlight. You didn't have to risk yourself, he said. Clara smiled faintly. You didn't have to save me either. But you did. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a promise neither of them needed to say aloud. Over time, Clara began to see Elias not as the man who bought her, but as the man who gave her back her life. And Elias began to see Clara not as the broken woman from Red Mesa, but as the reason he finally believed in grace again. One morning, months later, Elias stood on the porch watching. Clara and the baby, now strong and laughing, chased sunlight across the grass. His heart, once locked behind grief, began to open again. Clara, he said quietly, stepping closer. You don't owe me anything. You can go if you wish. She turned, smiling softly.
Elias, I don't want to leave.
This is home. Tears welled in his eyes, the kind he hadn't shed in years. He nodded slowly. The sun broke through the clouds then, painting the world gold. Years later, travelers who passed by Kane Ranch spoke of a woman with kind eyes and a boy who called the old cowboy Pa. They said the ranch was the warmest place in the valley, and not because of its fire, but because of the love that lived there. And sometimes, on quiet nights, Clara would look at the stars and whisper, He didn't buy me to own me. He bought me so I could live again. So if you're watching this story right now, remember, sometimes life gives second chances when you least expect them. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change an entire world.